Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending Animals, Arts, and Science. This is the 11th in the Center for Environmental Inquiry at Sonoma State University's Fall Dig into Nature series of 20 virtual events. My name is Margot Rollins, and I am the program coordinator for the Galbraith Preserve at the center. Until COVID-19 hit us, we did our programming up there or at that, and the Galbraith Preserve is in Yorkville, in Mendocino County, or we did it at the Fairfield Osborne Preserve on Sonoma Mountain in Pengrove. But since then, we've taken them virtual and have enlarged and expanded our audience, for which we're grateful. We usually pass around a sign-in sheet about now, but in lieu of that, could everybody please take a moment to type their name into the chat box? Thank you. Before I let our presenter take it away, I want to tell you just a little bit about the center and how we can be a resource to you, no matter if you're affiliated with SSU or not, whether you're a student, parent, educator, mentor, a member of the public, or part of an organization that could use help with sustainability in the environment. The center envisions a North Bay working together to find sustainable solutions, and we invite you to get environmentally ready with us. That is our slogan, environmentally ready. We're building a community of learners and problem solvers across all sectors of society by providing enhanced understanding of our connection with the environment and skill building experiences that lead toward sustainable solutions. There are many ways to get involved. You can engage in research, take one of our naturalist training programs, attend events like these, gain access to some of the data that is on our website, lead or contribute to events such as this, and partner with us on projects in many other ways. Each of you is a critical element as we work together to solve some of the greatest environmental challenges in history. Today, we're going to be talking about animal tracks and how to find them and read them and use them to better understand the natural world around us. Our leader is Meghan Walla-Murphy. Meghan is a wildlife ecologist, writer, conservationist, and educator. In addition to teaching classes at Santa Rosa Junior College, she leads workshops at the UC Davis Hopland Research and Extension Center and is an instructor for the University of California's California Naturalist Program. She brings her enthusiasm and passion to teaching how tracking can broaden our appreciation of the world around us. You can learn more about her background at meghanwallamurphy.com. This is what the format today will be, what we call a deep dive format. Meghan will present for 40 minutes, and then we will have a 10-minute question and answer session. The formal program will end at 3, but Meghan and I will stay on the Zoom call for anyone who has questions that didn't get answered throughout the program. This is being recorded and will be posted on our website. I will put in the chat where you can find the recording, and I will email you as soon as it is done. So with that, Meghan, please take it away.
So I just want to thank you for your time and energy and meeting in this place. We're not going to talk really specific about species in my area because you may all hail from different ages and places and regions, but we're going to talk about a lot of general patterns and things that are ubiquitous across many ecologies. I've had a great privilege of traveling around the world and working in lots of different habitats. So we're going to talk about broad patterns and pattern literacy for sure. Please, as Margot said, if there are questions about, or I'm being confusing or I've flipped my words, sometimes I get a little dyslexic, just let Margot know, or if for any reason you can't hear me. Can you all hear me okay right now? Okay, great. Well, I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna get started. Let's see. Great, and can you all see that right now, pretty much? Great. So welcome to the art and science of tracking, and we're going to kind of come back to this idea of learning to see and to really look at things. I love this picture just because I want to kind of broaden our minds that tracking is not just animal tracks in some kind of substrate. Everything leaves tracks, whether they're like tracks of plate tectonics and we're looking at mountains, or water tracks, or plant tracks. So let's just go into that journey of opening our mind for that. And I also want to really open this idea as well of that all of us are descended from trackers. Somewhere in your lineage, regardless of where you are from, and where your heritage and ancestry is from, you are descended from someone who was able to track, whether they were tracking plants and they were harvesting things, or they were tracking animals, because that was what we needed to do to survive. And your genetic lineage wouldn't have made it if someone in your own family didn't know how to track. And so I love that, because that means somewhere in our DNA and in our long, ancestral memory, you know how to track. So this is all kind of a remembering, like remembering of things you already know. Because I've had the great privilege of working and traveling, and I've worked with a lot of Indigenous people and lived with many different people around this world, it feels really important for me to begin our presentation with all of the different teachers who've come to me in my own world, and different cultures and places and ages and people. And certainly I include the animal folks as my teachers, and the plants and waters and just the land itself. And to realize that there's this lineage of people standing behind each of us, and whatever our trade and skill is, just honoring those people is really important. So as Margot said, I am a wildlife ecologist, but I'm also an author, and I spend a lot of time working in collaborations and kind of bringing different people together. But I want to pull apart that idea of ecology. Ecology stems from this word oikos, which is a Greek word, and it means home. So I love that. So ecology is the study from home, or of home. And I live in Sonoma County. I'm out in the West, in the small town of Occidental. So for me, my home can be very intimate, like the actual place where I live and where I've been spending a lot of time since COVID, but it could be as large as my home is California. I grew up in Southern California in the coastal mountains, and have never lived farther, if I'm in California, farther than 7 miles from Highway 1. Like, I am a coastal mountain California girl. But I've also had this great, as I said, privilege of traveling and working in many different countries. So, I want you to kind of decide what is home for you and what will you study. We all have this intuitive understanding. If we were all had this kind of question and answer session, I would ask you, what is tracking? It's a totally arcane, kind of obscure, bizarre skill set that I was able to jump into and have been practicing. And truly, it is a practice, just like it would be if I was playing the piano, which I don't at all, or singing or anything like that. Tracking is a practice in which I do over and over again every day. And so in that, though, what I really find is that tracking is story. We're learning to read the stories on a landscape. They are left, and we'll refer to animals right now, footprints left on the ground telling us a story of what's happened. And if you can think of like one word, a word in a story, that would be like one footprint. And then if you have a couple of footprints strung together, maybe you have a sentence. And if you have the privilege of following an animal throughout its life, maybe that's the whole novel of the animal. But it really is about story and eliciting those stories. But tracking is also about telling the stories and bringing them back to your community, because that's what trackers did. They went out into the world, we hunted, we brought things back, but because you were out away from the village, you're bringing kind of that news back. So we're going to start this presentation with this story. I have over many years, been able to work in the Kalahari with the Komani-San Bushmen, and this is kind of in the most northern part of South Africa, and where Namibia and Botswana come together. And I found that the very first time I was out there, and that was like 2006, I think, I was by myself and I was driving around, and I ended up landing in this guest house with a woman named Professor Ann Rasa. And she actually studied with Konrad Lorenz, who had won the Nobel Prize for etiology, animal behavior. And she's out here in the middle of nowhere in the Kalahari. And she was working with one of the most well-known, renowned Bushman trackers named Fet Pete. And Fet Pete had died the year before I got there, but he had been her teacher. And I was really excited. And this was just out of the blue that I meet this woman. And so she takes me out on the dunes, and she was an expert insect tracker. So you can track all kinds of things. So we're out there, and she's showing me these tracks that you see before you. And she's like, yeah, that's a katydid ovipositing. And I'm like, what? You are crazy. But sure enough, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, but right here, this is where the katydid kind of squats down and snuggles her ovipositor into the sand and lays her eggs. And sure enough, we followed the tracks out, and there was the katydid. So I'm out with Ann Rasa, and she's now quizzing me the same way that Fet Pete had quizzed her, and she'd say, oh, you know, what is this track? And sometimes I would get it right, and often I would get it wrong. And every time I got it wrong, she would say, no, you must geek moy. And it's not an English terminology that we have here in the United States. And she'd say, geek moy. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And she told me it's what it is, and it loosely translates into English as it means to look beautifully at something, to really see it for what it is, not what your perception is. So I want to kind of throw out that we as people and humans and trackers, we like to put what we want it to be on the track. And I can't tell you how many times, you know, that big dog, I was like, oh, it's a mountain lion. I really want it to be. But if I cake moy and I slow down and really see it, that's what it becomes. It's the dog. And the dog is important to know. Why is the dog out in the backcountry? So I had this really brought home to me. I was out again in the Kalahari, and this is Bok Peen, and he was one of the first Komani-san trackers to be used for research, and this is a cheetah track up there. So I got to go out with Dr. Gus Mills and Bok Peen, and we were tracking cheetah. And while I was waiting to go out on this adventure with Bok Peen and Gus Mills, I was walking around. This is kind of what the Kalahari, the national park, looks like, where we were doing the research, and I was waiting my turn to go meet them. And I saw these tracks, and I was like, wow, they look just like house cat tracks. And I immediately was like, oh my God, there's a house cat here, and it's probably devastating the natural fauna. And I started freaking out. And then I could hear like Fet Pete and Ann Ross in my back of my mind. And I'm like, no, cake moy, look more deeply, really look at this. So I stopped again and I looked at this track, and if you can see where my cursor is, there's this little dot right here. Well, house cats don't make that dot. And I realized, oh no, it's a genet track, which is this really beautiful, endemic mesocarnivore that lives in the Kalahari. And what it said to me is like, oh, it behooves me and all of us to slow down and to look deeply at something, so that if we are going to tell this story, we're telling it accurately, not from our own brain or our own grief or our own joy, but from really what is there and honoring what happens there.
So Megan, there was a question from Yoriko. He says, she asked, what was the phrase again for to look beautifully?
It's cake moy, K-Y-K-M.
I'll put it in here. K-Y-K-M-O-O-I, right?
Yep. So, brings me to this question, why tracking? And I'm going to just go through some of the things that I have learned with more than 20 years of tracking. And the first one is this idea of learning to hold a question. We come from a culture where we are taught information, and then our expectation is, especially if we're sitting in a classroom, is that we take in this information and then we regurgitate it back. And if someone asks us a question, we're supposed to have the answer. But more often than not, when I am tracking, I don't know the answer. And that happens over and over again. I'm just like, what is this? And so what tracking has taught me to do is to just hold the question. And can I be comfortable with not knowing? And can I surrender to the not knowing and the wonder of what's going on? And I'll tell you more often than not, and I have this picture here because this is still a track I don't know, but more often than not, the answer will come. And sometimes it's within days and sometimes it's within a year or two. But that ability to hold a question and to the joy of wonder has been incredible with tracking. So another kind of lesson that I have learned from tracking is to really pay attention to breaks in a pattern. And what I mean by breaks in a pattern is if you know, let's say you know the bird song in your house when you walk out the door, and whether you live in Oakland or you live on 1,000 acres, and you're accustomed to that bird song at that time of day, and you come out and it's totally silent. That's a break in a pattern, and it's a really important piece of knowledge. So here, this is kind of a tracking metaphor of it, but you can see that was a coyote back there. I'm up here, I was living in the Adirondacks in upstate New York, and you can see these where my cursor is every time it stops is a coyote track. And this coyote is just trotting really beautifully, very regular pattern. That is a classic track, no matter what substrate it's in. So I'm following this coyote out, just curious to see what it's doing. And all of a sudden, the coyote does something called a box stop. So you can see, here's its 2 front feet, here are the 2 hind feet. So that coyote, which was in that really beautiful, regular, nice trot, has now stopped. Well, that's a break in the pattern, and that's curious to me. You know, coyotes are moving often, or if they're stopping for a reason. So then I become really curious because of that break in the pattern. I'm like, what's happening? Why is this coyote stopped? And then I follow it out a little bit more, and I can see, you know, this coyote is now sitting down. So here's the front feet, and here's the hind feet, and these are kind of like the back of the leg, you know, when a dog sits down. And it's looking, you know, to this top left corner of the screen. And so, of course, I get into where the coyote is, and I kind of sit there, and I look, and there in front of me is a creek bed. You know, it's mostly deciduous trees, so you can see everything, but there's a lot of cover and brush. And there's some like, wow, why did coyote stop and then sit and take some time to look in this direction? So I followed coyote out, and I came to this. There was a bunch of deer bones hidden under the snow, and all of that was alerted to me because of the break in the pattern. You know, if it was just normal, coyote would have been trotting and the story wouldn't have emerged. So it becomes really important to notice breaks in a pattern, whether it be in your own life, like maybe you're taking a new job, or someone has died, or there's a birth in your life, or it feels like 2020 is all about breaks in the pattern, right? And so how do we pay attention to those breaks in the pattern, and how do we keep moving with them and adjust to them as well? So that became a really important metaphor that tracking has taught me. I think one of the things that I am just so profoundly thankful for in my own tracking journey, and what I see with many, many of my students, is this idea of we are all connected. And I know that can kind of be cliche, or you hear that so often, but tracking has made it absolutely practical and fundamental, this connection that I can't deny. And so here I'm in South Africa in Kruger National Park, and this is the Olifants River. And I had the great privilege of actually just being sitting up on a little bit of a hill, watching this herd of elephants cross this river. And one of the locals there had told me that this was an ancestral trail for these elephants, and they've been crossing at this place for time immemorial. And what was amazing to me, and why I show it with this, why it's with this picture of connection, is that when the elephants and their herd were over here, and this is a matriarchal herd of mothers and babes, when they were on the left side of the screen, from my mind, it looked like they were random and kind of just wandering and playing and doing whatever, feeding. And then they got to the water, but that randomness changed. And all of the large elephants and the mama elephants went upstream of the current. And then all the little ones, they made sure all the little ones were downstream of them, because you can see how deep it is, right? These little ones are swimming. And what I realized, I was like, oh, the mamas are breaking the current for the little ones to be able to cross. And so, you know, all of a sudden I was like, oh, these elephants are not only connected to the water and the currents and how water flows, but they're understanding how that water and current flows and affects their little ones and what they need to do. And And all of a sudden it just busted my understanding wide open. And more, I am in deep understanding that we are all connected. This is a meerkat, and we're actually just sitting there watching the sun set. And I've had these experiences more often than not, well, maybe not more often than not, but definitely often enough that if I can get quiet and still and slow down, things will move towards me rather than away from me. Because we are all connected, and I think for most of human history, we've been part of that conversation, and it's only really recent in human history that we've kind of extracted ourselves from that communication. But if we allow that conversation to happen, and I don't mean like Dr. Dolittle conversation, I'm talking like just relationship, as you would. I mean, it's hard enough to communicate with humans, but just if you can be open so that we're connected, it happens, I guess. Another thing, and this has become really instrumental in the collaboratives I work in conservation, is I've learned to really...
ecological tracker, and it's so...
Somebody does not... Oh, thank you. Sorry, I thought it was a question. I've really learned to look from many, many different perspectives. So here's another kind of example of this through tracking. This was in the Santa Lucia Mountains, which is the mountain range behind Big Sur. And it was a Thanksgiving snowstorm up there. And I was hiking out after a week of being in, and I came on these tracks and I was like, wow, what is this? It was really exciting. So when I first come on tracks that I don't know, I like to see the big picture. I pull way back and try and take in the whole trail. So that's what I'm doing here. And then I got closer, and just to show you, in each one of these little holes, there was actually 2 tracks like that. So I'll start out with kind of this wide angle lens, and then I get a lot closer. And in there, I saw these 2 tracks, and as we'll talk about this, these are bobcat tracks. And this is the front, which is on the right side of the screen, and the hind on the left. And then I get even closer and really start to look at the detail. Can I see the different lobes? How are the toes arranged? But what was amazing was there were claws in these tracks, even though it's a bobcat track, because often you hear, oh, you don't see claws in feline tracks. But sometimes you do. So then I get really close and I go really myopic. And then I actually walk around a track, especially if it's a track I'm not familiar with, because often the way that I'm looking at it changes how I see things. Literally, the light changes, the depth changes, shadows change. It's pretty amazing. And so when I do that, I look at a track from all different perspectives. And this has become paramount in my work. Sometimes I'm working with frackers and environmentalists, and we're all sitting at the same table, or vineyard owners and cattle ranchers and, people who are hunters and things. And then you have people who are no kill, and you get these wide range of people at the table. And it's really important that everyone's at the table, but it's also important that we can look at each other from different perspectives. Tracking is great in teaching me what I am distracted by, because if I'm distracted, I'm not seeing. And so it's become this great tool and lens to teach me about distraction. And sometimes I am. I watch movies and I love being distracted, but can I be aware of it when I am distracted? And of course, maybe not of course, but certainly tracking has developed a deep sense of place for me. Like, to know my home and to call it such is really important. I have a dear friend, Redbird, who is Pomo Wailaki and Paiute, I believe. And he always says he believes one of the biggest environmental challenges we face right now is that people don't call where they live home. Because we come from somewhere else, we're going to somewhere else, we rent a place. And until we start to develop that sense of place and home, it becomes really hard to tend it and respect that landscape. So tracking, even if I'm in a place just for a couple of days, I'll go out and I'll track it so I can get a sense of what's going on. So we're gonna kind of do a deep dive. Let me just check my time. I have about 15 minutes about each animal, and not obviously we're not going to do all the animals. I've picked a few, and they all have a story to tell. So we're going to look at bears because I am deep, deep, deep into the North Bay Bear Collaborative, of which I'm the director of, and we're studying black bears in the North Bay right now. But I've been tracking these folk for, I don't know, last 15 years, and they blow my mind. So here's a bear track. This is actually a grizzly track. I don't have a really beautiful black bear track that was available really quickly right now. This is a hind foot and a front foot. So up on the top left, these are grizzlies. California was predominantly a grizzly state. We had far more grizzly than we did black bear, especially anywhere from about Sonoma County south. The Sierras had a lot of black bears, and like Humboldt and Mendocino counties had a lot of black bears, but mostly we were a grizzly state. And here's our sweet little black bears, of which there are growing in California. There's estimated between 35 and 45,000 black bears in California. Here's just a map of the grizzly's habitat, and it actually went way down into mid-central Mexico. But due to our deliberate hunting and extirpation, the last grizzly was, I think, 1922 in California. Bears are incredible. They have this communication that we don't really understand. They leave these ancestral trails, or sometimes they're called step-by-step trails, where mamas will teach their cubs for generations and generations of how to step in these trails. And sometimes you'll see in videos where they've been caught that the adult will pop their elbows and then really stomp into those places. And I've been told that some of these in Alaska are like 3 feet deep. There's a lot of theories about why they do it, but no one really knows for sure. They love trees, they mark trees, they eat in trees, they use trees as babysitters. They are deeply in relationship. And most of what I'm going to talk about right now are black bears, since that is predominantly what's in the United States right now. Although grizzlies use trees as well for marking and scenting. What bears have taught me again about that connection is that to lose bears, you lose the relationship with water and salmon. Bears are these incredible dispersers of seed and nutrients. And if you can just imagine a swath of nutrients going across the landscape, that's what bears do, because they eat a lot. And it is true, bears shit in the woods and they poop a lot. And all of that becomes seed dispersing. But they are also part of this thing called the anadromous nutrient cycle, of which they will go and they'll eat the spawning fish. And if it's a big season, they'll only eat parts of the fish. They don't eat the entire fish. And so they're leaving this nutrients out for the fox, the coyote, the osprey, the golden eagle, whomever you want, the mice. And they come and they eat the rest of the fish that the bears have then left on the landscape. And then whatever they've eaten, they go and they sleep away from the river, and they're defecating out there. And this blew me away. There's a beautiful book, which I quoted earlier, called The Fish in the Forest. They had done a study, and I believe it was either on the Snake or the Columbia River, but it was in Idaho, and they started coring the trees that were near and a little bit away from the rivers, and they found that those trees had marine isotopes in them because of the nutrients that the bears were dispersing across the forest. So the bears were taking the salmon, going into the forest, defecating, and then those salmon nutrients were going and being used by the trees. And we're talking like millions of years, folks. That's incredible. It's so amazing. So, what does it mean when we lose our bears and then we lose our salmon? What does that mean for our forests as well? So there's just this incredible relationship of bears. And then there's bears and humans. And I'm not reading all of these quotes, and as you know, this will be recorded, but almost everywhere in the Northern Hemisphere, humans had a relationship with bears. From the great bear mother and shape-shifting to a woman marrying bears and giving birth to part bear, part human babies. They have taught us our medicines. They have taught us many, many of our foods. They've taught us how to come up from winter. And so this idea of bear and human relationship is deep and thick. And if you do have North American ancestry, most likely somewhere in your lineage, just like with tracking, there was a relationship with bears, which I think is great. I love the bears. Let's talk about herbivores really quickly, because sometimes they get overlooked because they're like, oh, it's a deer. I mean, you know, yeah, it's another deer. But they're really important. They are the prey base, and they work, and to me, they're kind of like the iconic symbol of community. They work together, because when you have the baboons, which are up high in the trees, and they can see more, but then you have, you know, this is an impala, and they have the big ears, so they can hear more. They're working together in conjunction, and it certainly happens. We've lost a lot of our big herds in California, but it happens in Yellowstone when you watch the pronghorn and the elk working together, or the bison and the elk working together, using each other to keep folks safe. And again, this is the same thing. This is kind of a holy trinity. You know, the giraffes are up high, have a better vantage point. The zebras make these incredible alarm calls, which alert everything. They're all working together. So I love that, herbivores as community. Pit vipers, you got to have the big breadth of creatures and that many people are afraid of. But I personally love pit vipers and rattlesnakes, and they've been incredible teachers for me and still are. I mean, look at that. Like, can you imagine what perfect camouflage? And certainly, you know, daunting. I have tremendous respect for that. But what this animal has taught me, kind of like what poison oak has taught me, is I need to be paying attention. If I'm out there, I need to be aware. Here's another, this is in the Kalahari Desert. This is called a horned viper. And what I love about these creatures, whether it's, you know, back here and it's a rattlesnake, this is a Mojave rattler, the rattles under the sand, or it's here where this camouflage is so good. If I'm aware and I am not just in my monkey mind thinking while I'm out, there are all of these signals and alarms and alerts that will tell me, be careful. So these lines right here are the tracks of this pit viper here. The rattle of a rattlesnake, what a great thing. It's telling you, like, you're too close, back up. It's my responsibility to be in honor of that and respectful of that. And just like poison oak, you know, if I choose to walk through it, am I doing it with consciousness? So how we move across the landscape is really important. And do we respect these things? You know, that we're not always the dominant species on the land. We're going to drop into this idea of beavers, wolves, and elk. My guess is many of you have probably seen that, like, how wolves change the water video. But there's some extra things I want to throw in here just so we can see a broader picture and kind of tie it into tracking as well. So beaver, they're kind of this amazing species that is iconic of water and waterways and spreading water across the landscape and slowing it down so it can sink into our water table. There's some cool tracks. Beavers are big. They have 5 toes on their front and hinds, and often their tracks are wiped away because they drag their tails through them. So this was pretty special to find these tracks here. And as I said, you know, they build these lodges and then they cut the trees and they dam things so that they can have safety and security so that their predators can't get to them. Because, you know, beaver are like little tasty morsels. They're just big fat nuggets. Maybe they taste like tater tots or something. I don't know. But everything likes to eat beaver. So they create water systems to protect themselves, which is great, especially in a landscape right now that is deeply dehydrated. The beavers are really important. And so then we're going to talk about the wolves. So the United States has a long, deep legacy of killing our carnivores. It's absolutely purposeful. It was written into many state constitutions, and it is still deeply part of our psyche in a lot of places. And so by 1970, the only place in the continental US that still had wolves was just in these kind of upper territories of Minnesota and Wisconsin. And it was in 1990, oh, let me go, because I can't see my slides. So there are wolves. So wolves were eradicated. And with the eradication of wolves, we had an explosion, or it's sometimes called an eruption of a species, IRRUPTION, like eruption. And there was an elk eruption. And we're going to talk right now about Yellowstone, because that was where wolves were initially reintroduced. So in come the elk. And elk, I love them. They're incredible species, but because the wolves were eradicated and wolves were their main predator, the elk lost this thing called the biology of fear. So animals understand predators, and they are afraid of predators just as I am. Like, I have a really healthy respect for the grizzlies when I'm out with them, or lions, or whatever it may be. And so when an animal understands that there are no predators around, it will stay put. So in a healthy ecosystem, if you watch ungulates, an animal will eat, put its head down, and pick it up. Eat, pick it up, pick their heads up and look around. But when you lose the predators, they don't do that. They eat and they eat and they eat and they don't move, right? And they only move if they have to. And so what happens is you get this kind of, it's called death by herbivory. And so you can see this is an elk exclosure fence. This is an area where there are no wolves. And the elk have eaten this aspen stand down to nothing. And so this was an experiment. I did an aspen ecology project for 5 years in Colorado, and looking at like the effectiveness of these exclosures. There's a lot of challenges, and we can talk about that later. But so what happened was, with the loss of our wolves, the elk were eating Yellowstone and many parts of it to death, basically. And we lost the willow and a lot of the plants that the beaver were so dependent on, of course, and that changes the systems of water in Yellowstone. The other thing I really want to talk about, and which I don't think that video spoke about, is that aspen and a lot of our plants also need environmental disturbances like fire, or like if a tornado comes down and opens up the canopy. And so to really understand ecosystems, there's this kind of top-down pressure, you know, the top of the carnivore chain. In this case, it was the wolf as the apex predator, but there's also these bottom-up forces of fire, soil disturbance, wind, flood. And it takes both of these things to actually make the system work in Yellowstone. So the wolves were invited back home. One of the carnivore biologists I worked with, Dr. James Halfpenny, was responsible for bringing these wolves back home, and things changed really significantly. Here is a track of a wolf. A wolf track is about the size of a small dinner plate. It's pretty amazing. So I was out there and I was tracking these wolves, and I saw this track, which is an elk track, but this, if you can see, these are the dew claws on the back of the elk, and the front toes are splayed. And so this animal is moving really quickly. And so I kept following, and I'm following this wolf tracks out, and you can see, so here's a C shape, it's a backward C, and here's another C shape. These are tracks of a wolf galloping. So there's these things called a rotary gallop, which a lot of animals do. This is a front left foot coming down first. The next time that foot hits is way over here. And because I'm a geek, I travel with a tape measure, and from here to here, where the front, this is front left, this is front left, was 17 feet. That means that wolf was hauling ass. Sorry for my swearing. And so,
Megan, I'm sorry, you've got about 5 minutes left.
Perfect. We're right on time. So this wolf was, you know, definitely chasing and running after an elk. And lo and behold, and this is, I have to give a disclaimer, this wasn't actually what was at the end of the trail. That wolf punt didn't work. But there are many times that I have come up across wolf tracks and they have killed an elk. This is Dr. James Halfpenny that I was working with, and we would often go out and find these elk kills from a wolf, and we would do necropsies on them. And we would look at the molars to age the animals, and we would also look at the bone marrow and the big, thick leg bones. And more often than not, and I'd say something like 95%, the elk were quite old or sick that the wolves were getting, because elk are really fast, and wolves can't go after a healthy, strong elk. It's pretty incredible. So the wolves came back. The numbers of elk definitely decreased. When you hear hunters say that wolves have decreased elk numbers, it's absolutely true. They have. That's what they do. But they decreased them to a population that was actually sustainable so that there could be other plants and animals that were growing. And so as the elk came home, as the wolves came home, the elk numbers dropped, and then the beaver were able to have enough food supply to recontinue. So the very last species I want to talk about is gorillas, relatedness, and quiet. And I added this because I think it's really pertinent to what's going on right now in our just crazy 2020 pandemic presidential election time. So when I turned 40, I decided to check something off my bucket list, and I flew to the Congo to track gorillas, which I'd always wanted to do. And there are many, many, many things I was taught during that time. And you can see right here, this is a mama gorilla looking at a root that she had just dug up. But what I want you to really look at in these pictures are the faces. Like, I've made these faces. When I'm looking at something, my student is like, God, you look so interesting. You look just like that picture. You know, and when you're really staring someone down and you're curious and a little bit like hesitant, like, who are you? What's going on? And that was one of the things that came up to me, is how deeply related we are to all of these animals. But the other thing that I was astonished by was how quiet these guys were. I think in the media, we hear gorillas and you get these noises like, you know, and the chest thumping and all of that. But really, what I was astounded by was how much communication was going on through their facial expressions and body posture and body language, but it was totally silent. The forest was alive with birds and such, but the gorillas were quiet. And it really made me think how deeply important it is for us to find quiet, because there's a lot of noise going on right now with the media and debates and COVID and all of the social justice movements. And it's important, but I really find that we have got to learn how to, one, be quiet so that we can listen, but two, so that we can be in communication in a real way. And that was what I had seen through the gorillas. So I kind of pose this question to you as we wrap up is, you know, where and how do you find quiet so that when you do have to show up, you're doing it in a way that's good for you? And that's, you know, tracking is a great way to get quiet. So with that, I will wrap it up and we'll leave this slide up. That's my website down there. You're welcome to contact me through my website. It also has classes and different things up there. And I just really want to thank you for your time and energy in this kind of bizarre medium. And please, if you have any questions, I'm really happy to answer.
Thank you, Megan. That's great. Are there questions that people would like? I don't see many questions in the chat, but I'm sure you have them.
Yeah, and feel free. I'm also happy if they want to unmute themselves, Margot.
Oh yeah, I think at this point, yes, please go ahead. Just unmute yourselves if you wish to ask a question directly to Megan.
All right.
Are people trying to unmute? I can't tell. Sometimes we have some problems with that. Carrie, can you put in the chat if you're having a hard time unmuting?
Sure. It looks like people are asking questions in the chat if you want to read them out loud.
Oh. Great.
Well, I see one. This is great. This is great. It's not a question, but my 6-year-old says she wants to do what you do, be a nature girl.
Well, great.
Great. That's great.
No one is more surprised than me that this is my world.
What is meant by the bears using trees as babysitters?
Oh, that's a great question. So bears, mama bears will use large conifers or trees that have really deeply grooved bark. So let me step back a minute. When a mama comes out from the den and she has newborn cubs with her, she's really, really hungry, but she can't be kind of dragging these little defenseless cubs around with her. And so what she does is she'll like slap the base of a trunk of a tree, and the little cubs go up this very deeply grooved, easy to climb conifer, and they hang out in the branches up at the top. And then she can go and forage. So these trees are literally babysitter trees, keeping them safe way up high. And then when she's ready, she'll come down, slap the bottom of the trees, and the little cubs come down. It's pretty incredible. Yeah, it's really amazing. I've heard that slap. I didn't see the mom slap, but I heard it. And then we looked up, and there were the cubs. It was pretty cool.
Do all bears climb trees?
They can. Grizzlies don't tend to climb trees as much. Black bears are way up in trees all the time. Black bears love trees.
Question, how can you tell the difference between a dog track and a wolf track?
That's a great question. Size is a lot of it, and this kind of goes with coyote. Coyote and dog overlap a lot more than wolf and dog. So for size, for coyote and dog, it doesn't really work. For coyote, it's a lot of behavior. You know, dogs have this ample amount of food and energy and resource, and so when they get out of a car, they're like, "Yay!" and they run around and they're willy-nilly, and they go out on the trail and they're moving back and forth. Coyote and wolf don't have that kind of expendable energy, so when they're moving, they tend to move in straight lines and very energy efficient. And the tracks actually reflect that energy efficiency. They're very streamlined. They're not as bulbous and kind of fat and globular as dog tracks too. That would be the quick answer for that.
Interesting. Yodiko asks, are there any other vocabulary that she enjoyed how do you pronounce it? The kikmoy?
Yeah, kikmoy.
Are there any other vocabulary that African trackers or other trackers use as they sharpen their observation skills?
There's nothing that's coming to me right now. Like, I don't speak. So kikmoy is actually an Afrikaans term. So what's happened is, so it's not a tribal language. And what's happened is, you know, as the Afrikaans were the colonizers and the dominant culture, many of the tribal languages were lost, and they now speak Afrikaans. So that's an Afrikaans term. I would have to go back into my notes. I have journals and journals of that time, but that's a great question. I'll think about that. Thank you for asking.
Alanya asks.
Hi, I've
Go ahead.
sorry. I just unmuted myself. My
Good.
name's Leslie, and I live in Navarro on the edge of the redwoods, and I'm just wondering what you think about. We've had some logging happening here, and so there's been a lot of sightings of black bears, and I'm just wondering, you know, what that does to the ecosystem when they log, you know, the redwoods, as far as the bears and the, you know, the other critters.
That's a really, really good question. And it's a big one. So I'll do my best to be succinct. So there's a lot of different management strategies of logging. Some of it is really good and really important. You know, the North Bay and, you know, beyond is having a big problem with what we call Douglas fir encroachment. Because of suppression of fire, we have Doug fir that's coming in, and we're losing a lot of our diversity of plants. So we're losing like our oaks and our bay and a lot of even elderberry and a lot of food sources for animals. So logging that's conscious of building diversity can be really important. And it also depends, you know, clear cut is devastating, right? And clear cut does still exist and happen. It takes the land will recover, but it takes a very, very, like, decades for the land to come back. And so what happens is what bears need and most wildlife needs, and certainly humans need, is we need a mosaic of habitats, right? So it's great that we have the redwoods. I live in Occidental in the redwoods, but right next to where the redwoods are that I live are these big open grassy lands, right? And that is a huge amount of food. And then there's some oak woodlands. And so what we need are these mosaics of different habitats versus all ubiquitous one kind of plant species. So my question for those loggers or whomever the forester is, you know, what is their ultimate goal? Some people see a forest as a commodity, others see it as a way of creating biodiversity. There's some really great books. There's a great book called Native Americans and Biodiversity, which talks a lot about land management from the perspective of enhancing biodiversity. And it goes back for, you know, into these practices that are thousands of years old of how indigenous people in North America were tending for diversity. Another really great book is 1491 by Charles Mann. Another really amazing book, which maybe many of you have heard of, is Tending the Wild by M. Cat Anderson, and addressing all of these things where thinning and timber were part of a management plan, but done with it through a different lens than commodity.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, can you say what that first book was? Native American what?
It's called Biodiversity in Native Americans, and it's a collection of essays. So it's got many different authors. I can't remember who the editor is right now, but if you look that up, it should come up.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much.
One of the questions here, what's the biggest bear track you've seen?
Oh. Well, I haven't seen polar bears, but I've seen some pretty big grizzly tracks that are, you know, my feet are pretty small. I only wear 6 or 6.5, but grizzly tracks that are well beyond the size of my feet. In fact, I just got back from doing some work out in Montana and Yellowstone, and there's a good like 3 inches bigger than my foot. So yeah, they're big animals, those grizzlies.
Yeah. Where in Upper Idaho and Montana is the best place to track grizzlies?
You know, I am not familiar with Idaho and Montana, Upper Montana. Most of my time has been down like in Gardner and the Centennial Valley and like the southwestern parts of Montana. So I don't know very much about Idaho. You know, it's tough. Grizzlies are hard. They're random creatures, just like bears. You know, they're moving wherever the food is. So you want to look for substrate and be really cautious. Like, it is no joke to trail and track a grizzly. Like, I will say the first time I went to Yellowstone, maybe 10, 15 years ago, everyone I had met that trip had known someone or been mauled themselves. You know, like, and that is still the truth. Like, grizzlies are, they're not doing it to eat you. They're doing it because you have surprised them or startled them, and they're cantankerous. They're a little, you know, they don't want to be bugged. They like their space. And so just, you know, be really cautious in doing that. Not necessarily advocating that, unless you're with maybe a couple people or something.
Yeah.
That's my disclaimer.
Are there any other questions for Megan? Megan, you taught me one thing that I thought we're talking about the difference between dog and cat tracks, or canine and feline tracks, was that not, because you can't always see the nail in the dog track. So something about drawing an X between the pads. Can you talk about that?
So what happens, if you're familiar with the idea of negative space, which is the space in between. So the positive space would be the space where the pads are pushing down, and the negative space is the space in between, or the raised part of the track. In dogs, that negative space makes an X, and in cats, it makes a C. And so especially, and you see that X way more in dogs than you do the C in cats, especially if you're in difficult substrates like sand or snow, where the toes might get obscured, but then negative space really pops up. So that X becomes really pronounced. And you see it in foxes as well, but it's less of an X and more of a kind of H, like a really broad H.
Interesting. Anita asks, are you collecting records of bear sightings?
Yes, we are. And you can email me through my website. And what we need mostly is if you have a photo, or if it's SCAD or a track or something, the photo becomes really imperative. And then we need a GPS location. ideally, or a pin dropped on a map or something like that for our map. So we are looking for, we're trying to establish what the range is we're working on a DNA project, but we're also just incidental sightings for the North Bay, so we can kind of get a handle on where our bears are.
Would videos be helpful also?
Yeah, videos are great. Any kind of just confirmation.
Okay, good. So your email again, I'll type it in the chat.
Yeah, if you go to my website and you go to contact, that will take you right to my email. And it goes right to me. I just have a long email, so it's easier if you do it that way.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Well, I think we're going to wrap up. Megan's going to stay around a little bit longer if people have questions, but I just have a few closing remarks for everybody. I want to thank you all for coming. I think the comments, you all enjoyed and learned a lot from this. If you have other questions that you want me to relay to Megan directly, you can email me at rollinsm.sonoma@sonoma.edu. And you also have my email on the confirmation information you've received. So as I said, this is the 11th in our series, and we have a lot more really interesting programs coming up. So please check them out at cei.sonoma.edu/calendar. And because they're virtual, feel free to spread the word beyond the North Bay. We're interested in talking to people in having people join us from all over the country. A few things I wanted to say about our next couple of events. We have one on ticks that's going to be with the researcher Emily Pascoe, talking about ticks and their hosts, and a little bit about some of the things that have happened since the fires up at Hopland Research and Extension Center happened with ticks as a result of the fires. And that's going to be on November 5th. And then we will have an unusual photography program coming up on assistive technology that can help people with limited access get out into the field and enjoy the world of photography. And finally, we invite you all to an unusual series that we're part of called the Live from the Field series, which is part of the biological field stations of the United States and the rest of the country and around the world. And these programs will be highlighting scientists, researchers from 3 different field stations and the different kinds of work that they are doing. So do check out our website and stay safe, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, so we'll stay on a little bit, let people have a chance if they want to take off. So there are people. I don't know what to do, Carrie, about getting people if they can't unmute. We've been through this before.
Yeah, are people having trouble? I haven't seen any chats about that. Have they sent it to you?
No, I haven't either, but it just surprises me that we still have people left and they're not.
Well,
maybe they just want to see what other people have questions about.
Well, Leslie has more questions.
Yeah, I just unmuted myself, and on the top of my screen there's a little unmute blue button, so it's super easy.
It is easy.
Mute myself, unmute myself as at will. So I don't know. I have a couple of questions, Megan, to follow on the whole bear thing. Yeah, I have seen probably 4 or 5 bears where I live here, and the last bear I saw was didn't look like a black bear. I mean, it was super cinnamon, and I know that they can vary in color, but this bear had quite large facial features, and it looked like, you know, I don't know, it was a different color, and it was very large. So, and then I've seen a mom with babies a couple of years ago, but there are a lot of bears here, and you know, I was concerned with all this logging that's gone on. It's not clear cut, but it's a mess. It's not. It hasn't been, you know, there's big slash piles and things. But why do the bears differ in color like that?
It's a lot of genetics. So black bears range this huge from like literally they're called like the white bears all the way to dark, dark, dark black. And there's this and there's blue black bears and things like that. So it's the same as like a hair color. It is a hair color genetic trait, or similar to IR colors. So there, you know, I feel pretty confident in saying there are no grizzlies in California. You know, and our huge range of black bears are these different genetic variations. And yeah, the logging thing is really, really difficult. You know, but disturbance is a reality. Bears are thankfully, you know, I'm being bear centric or certainly an ursophile, but bears are really good omnivorous creatures that know how to do far and wide ranging and find food. And what I would say is watch that area and see, you know, what happens with the bears. And if you have wildlife cameras, see what happens. A lot of what we're finding with the fires, at least in the last couple of years around here in Sonoma County and Napa County, is just even within days to weeks after the fires have gone through, the bears are back and a lot of the wildlife is back, and that the fires are often very beneficial for wildlife because they are, you know, clearing out thickets and things that our poor stewardship of the land has created a dearth or a food desert. And then when the fire comes through, all of these varieties and diversities of food species come up. And so ultimately it's beneficial for wildlife. Although it feels traumatic and tragic at the time that it's happening. And it can be. I mean, I'm not trying to downplay the reality of fire to the degree that we're having it right now, to the intensity. So I would say, you know, go out and track it and see and find out. I'd be curious. I think it's a great question. You could go back and do your whole master's thesis on the question.
Are bears, are bears likely to go after livestock?
Not likely, but they have been known to do so. You know, I think one of the bears that was out here in Occidental, maybe in 2014, went after a goat, didn't successfully kill the goat, but was, you know, they're dispersing young. So it was a dispersing male juvenile and it was hungry and trying its best. And that's what ultimately had it shot. But they typically don't. Grizzlies will in larger places, but no, not typical, although they can.
What kind of a range do they have?
We don't know. I mean, that's part of what this DNA study was hoping to establish, and that we are hoping to establish with that. The ranges are hugely diversified or different depending on where you are. In Arizona, the bears have huge ranges because they're needing to travel for food. In areas, you know, like Tahoe, where there's a lot of anthropogenic food sources, their ranges are really small and they overlap significantly more than in other places. So it really depends on the hyperlocality of where the bear is and what food is available and when.
Well, what constitutes a small or large range? Is it?
Oh, like I think in Tahoe and like South Tahoe, which is 3 square miles, there's like 25 or 26 residential bears, which is a lot. Like that's super high density, right? Versus like in, I think in Arizona, I don't know. I never remember numbers. I'm not, but I think it was something like 30 square mile range for one bear.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're huge.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, thank you very much, Meghan. It was very interesting.
Oh, great, Leslie. Thank you. You know, somewhere for you to really check out is the Navarro Vineyard. I don't know if you've heard about them and his relation. Whoever the owner is doing it. Yeah,
it's only 2 miles. It's only 2 miles from us where we live.
Cool. Well, he's got a bear that comes through and eats his Pinot Noir grapes, and then, you know, instead of the bear would come in and take down his fence, and instead of dealing with that, he actually put a ladder up there to get up and go over.
Yeah.
Really,
I heard.
Yeah, so he'd be a cool guy to talk up to. I really want him to come in and speak in our collaborative sometime. I need to reach out to him. So. Cool.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Leslie.
Great. Thank you very Thank you very much.
Yeah, take care.
Are there
Stay
any
safe.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions that people have? No? Well, great. Thank you so much, Meghan. Very,
My pleasure.
very interesting. And we'll be in touch on talking about some other topics.
What a
Great.
great different perspective to bring into this series. It's
Yeah.
just such a wonderful thing to have you. Thank you for coming.